An international conference is taking place in London aimed at tackling the use of sexual violence in conflict zones. Well, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has announced £12.5 million of funding and a 3-year strategy, which he says will put survivors at the centre of global response. Well, I'm joined now by Ugochi Daniels, who's the Deputy Director General of the UN's International Organisation for Migration and is attending the conference today. Very good to talk to you today. We've heard some really strong tales, not least from the Ukrainian First Lady who spoke just a short time ago. But sexual violence in war is very common, isn't it? It is something that has been going on for generations. How do you hope that you will ever be able to stop this being used as a weapon of war?
Thank you, Jane, for having me. And that's the whole purpose of the conference and why I'm here participating for the UN Migration Agency. Stopping it is going to require all of us. It's pervasive. We know that 30% of women and girls in a conflict setting will experience sexual violence, often multiple times. And solving that is going to require governments, communities, UN agencies, NGOs, and having the survivors at the center of solutions to end conflict-related sexual violence. And that's why I'm here, and that's why the conference is so important in terms of maintaining political momentum, hearing from the survivors themselves, and having all of us around the table.
But when you think about the horror of it, it's about power, isn't it? It's about power and control, as so much sexual violence in the world is. And to change the mindset that's behind that power and control, that is a really long-term thing to try to achieve, isn't it?
Oh, certainly. And that's what we all committed to in Beijing 25 years ago. And looking at where we are now, we recognize it's pervasive. We recognize much more needs to be done. We recognize that without achieving gender equality, we're not going to bring an end to conflict-related sexual violence or gender-based violence in general. And we also have to ensure as much as possible that women are able to participate in all aspects of leadership, of government, in the police force. That's what gender equality is about, particularly for women and girls.
As you say, equality key and central to much of this. How do you then feel when you look at countries like Afghanistan, where women's rights are being eroded and are just disappearing as we watch them?
I mean, certainly for the UN Migration Agency, we recognize that women and girls on the move face particular risks. And when we look at situations like what's in Afghanistan, and for us as IOM, we've been in Afghanistan for a very long time, working at the community level, supporting women and girls, supporting communities. But we continue to also work in the international sphere to bring attention to the situation in Afghanistan so that with everything going on, the situation there is not forgotten. And the only way we're going to be able to address issues on this scale is not to give up, to continue to stay engaged, to continue to put the voices of women and girls at the forefront and continue to work with them for solutions.
And Afghanistan, I suppose you would argue Afghanistan isn't necessarily at the moment a conflict zone, but do you have any evidence that the removal of women from positions of authority, from the gender equality that they were striving towards before the Taliban came, has there been a correlation with an increase in sexual violence, do you know?
I mean, what we have seen certainly is what the impact has been on families in terms of income, in terms of increase in debt, in terms of early marriage. So the impact cuts across all aspects of daily life for women and girls, as well as men and boys in Afghanistan. And that's why, as I said earlier, it requires all of us that are actors in this space to remain engaged in Afghanistan. But let's recognize, yes, Afghanistan, the situation is dire, but GBV is pervasive. As I said, it's one of the most pervasive human rights violations around the world. And that's why at a conference like this, at a global level, having political commitment is critically important.
In terms of sexual violence in conflict zones, what is the long-lasting impact on women? There will be some who will say, oh, well, at least they didn't die, they weren't on the front line fighting. But what are the real-term impacts that it has on the women's lives after these kind of horrific incidents happen?
I mean, I've seen it time and time again when I go to conflict zones and I speak to women themselves and what it does, how it affects them mentally, how it affects them physically. But having said that, I have also seen from survivors of sexual violence the strength, the determination, and the resolution that they have. At this conference, a key focus is to give central place to survivors as we talk about this issue and as we commit to the actions that are definitely needed going forward to make progress, not to make progress on the issue, but to end conflict-related sexual violence. And let's be clear, the impact is devastating, but they are survivors. They are champions. They are very clear on the future that they want for themselves, that they want for their families, their children, the community. And that's what we need to stay focused on, and which is why having this conference for survivors and with survivors is so important. And as I said, that's why I'm here at the highest level to show the UN Migrations Agency's commitment for all of our operations to make sure that women and girls on the move are not at risk for sexual violence.